So ladies, gentlemen, fellow Kryptonians out there, welcome to my Superman and Lois Season 4, Episode 4 recap, review, and breakdown. So what I'll say about this episode is that after quite an explosive first three, this one felt like more of a breather episode. There wasn't like a massive amount going on. Not that I think you need to have crazy amounts of things going on, especially when you do have other characters that this show wants to give story to this season. But we did obviously get big updates on things that we were waiting to see, such as the return of Superman. But in other areas, of course, at the same time, I was thinking, like, I wish I could see a little bit more here because we didn't get any Michael Cudlett's Lex Luthor, but still, let's go throughout the events for this episode. We're also going to touch on the promo at the end for the next episode with some theories and speculation and whatnot. So I would encourage you to leave your thoughts as well down in the comments below. Would also really appreciate a like. It goes a long way to help this video float out there a little bit more in the algorithm. So first of all, I think my favorite scene, I think it is actually we pick up with Lois and the boys in the aftermath of Sam Lane's death. But then there's something else, and we cut to the clouds. Both of the boys seem to hear something, and then Lois notices, and it's Clark flying his way back in, conveniently getting the memo to be dressed in black right after they had Sam Lane's funeral, I guess it was. But my favorite thing about this is that they decided to go with no dialogue, like no sound effects, no wind or whistling of the trees, absolutely nothing, just other than the score. You guys know me, I get very feelsy about this series. Like, we've very much so kind of bonded with these portrayals of Lois and Clark, Elizabeth Tulloch and Tyler Hoechlin. So, I was just very sucked in to this scene, seeing them reunited, and when the boys came out and whatnot, it was just, what can I say, a very, very sweet scene. And then after that, of course, we got the words from Clark talking about how through him dying, it's made him realize how fast life can go, how quickly everything can change, and ultimately he's never going to forget the sacrifice that Sam Lane made, giving them this second chance, and he's going to make the most of the time that they have on this planet, which I think really, all of this very early on in the episode is just the foreshadowing of what I was really kind of getting into last episode, and I'm sure a lot of other people were thinking it as well. As soon as we heard Lara say that she has her concerns about putting Sam Lane's heart into Superman, I was like, right, he's probably going to have some limitations, maybe age more, not have his powers as much, or maybe, when he tries to use his powers, that could be dangerous because the human heart might not be able to keep up with the Kryptonian body. And I really enjoyed that montage that we got at the beginning, seeing Clark's scar, Lois getting surgery, Jonathan helping Clark out on the Kent farm, flying around with that massive piece of wood. And this is the thing, like, Clark wants to get out there now that it's been 3 weeks, but his scar still hasn't healed. And Lois wants him to take it slow, of course, pointing out that he, as I was thinking last episode, that he literally has a 60-year-old man's heart in him. And yes, they don't know his limitations yet. And another really good point, like, I'm not saying that Clark was being stupid here, but here, like, Lois makes such a good point where it's like, yeah, if Luthor finds out you're alive, he'll send that thing after you again, and you're not ready to face it. Not yet. And I was like, well, yeah, like, imagine if he went out there, came across Doomsday, or Doomsday flew after him. He would be absolutely decimated. And I'm kind of surprised that Clark doesn't have the foresight to be like, yeah, I need to kind of get back, or wait to see if I get my full strength back, even though we don't know really if that's ever going to happen. So I don't really know what Clark's plan was there, other than maybe, being Superman makes him, or gives him, a sense of confidence. But I still feel like in the writing, it was a bit weird coming from Clark because he's already died to this creature. Now, the next scene that I enjoyed is when we saw Clark take Jonathan out to train, and Jordan sits out here because he already feels out of the spotlight with Jonathan coming into his powers and already excelling with them, but that's not really the main reason, of course. The main reason is, as he mentioned later on in a conversation with Sarah, that after failing to get his father's heart, he doesn't really feel like he can do anything but sit out because he feels incapable of being a hero. One thing I was a little bit, I don't know if I would say underwhelmed by, but I was a bit like, oh man, is that they glossed over Clark's reaction to Jonathan getting his powers. Now, I really would have liked to have seen that, but instead we just kind of saw them getting on with it in the montage with him already knowing, which I do get because, you know, maybe they needed to tackle various other parts of the story. They only have 10 episodes this season. Perhaps it would have just disrupted the structure of this episode, and if you shelved some other things for later on, that would disrupt the next episode and the episode after that. So you do have to figure it out. But I would have liked after that, no dialogue scene at the beginning with just the score, for after that there to be like a bit of a debrief like we've had in previous episodes. And for then, them to be like, also, Jonathan's got something to tell you, Clark. And then he does something and Clark just nerds out. It's not a big deal. It really isn't. It's just, I think it was such a big thing for Jonathan that I would have loved to have seen Clark's raw reaction to knowing that both of his sons now have manifested powers just like him. But we still got some awesome stuff here, though, with Clark training Jonathan. And I loved how he was a little bit insecure about saying, maybe once you've mastered this, you can move up to the Kessel Run. But Jonathan here comes back and saying, well, bonus points for making it in less than 12 parsecs. So I love that we did get a little bit of a nerd out from Clark here in this moment, because this is how I imagined him reacting to Jonathan getting his powers. But Jonathan just falls backwards here in absolute confidence, and Clark was like, pull up, but that doesn't really faze Jonathan because he just goes straight through the ice, and Clark's like, well, I guess fair enough, dealer's choice. But I was just thinking, the thing is, you can't obviously do that to a building in a city, so you kind of do have a little bit more to learn with the flying. And then next up we have Fury Road style, as Clark teases, they both fly together, and this is what I was waiting for. So Clark catches up with Jonathan in a bit of a flying boost, but when he does, his heart starts getting these somewhat palpitations, and then he passes out and just crashes into the ice. Now, right before we revisit that, the other things cooking along this episode for the main plot, I guess you could say, is back at the Gazette with Lois and Chrissy. There's still no sign of Luthor's people, and obviously they want to try and get to them to flip on Luthor. But we also have Kyle and Chrissy getting married this episode. Now, she has issues with her parents. She's a little bit on edge. She's feeling very rushed into this. We had a bit of an awkward meeting with her mum at the diner later on, calling Sarah practically the same age as Chrissy. Lois offers to host a wedding at the Kent barn. Clark becomes the best man, and Lois becomes the maid of honor. I get why, they were addressing this stuff this episode, but for me, believe it or not, even though I have given credit to Kyle and Chrissy's story in previous seasons where I felt like not enough people were, I think at this point, I just found myself not that interested in what was going on. I tried to be, but I'm just being honest here. Sure, there were nice scenes, with Clark and Kyle later, or between Lois and Chrissy, but I was just kind of I want to get back to the momentum of other things going on. But also understanding that since this is the final season, I get why you want to kind of give some kind of direction to the audience of where these characters are going to go. Now, when Lois gets back home, we hear Jonathan say that we should get Grandma to run some more tests at the fortress. And this is what I mean. I feel like, again, this episode just sometimes isn't getting into things that I feel like I would have liked to have seen, even if it was a 20-second scene before cutting back to the Kent farm. But I want to know what Lara said about the heart. What are the details or the diagnostics that she ran on the situation with the human heart merging with the Kryptonian cells and whatnot? But Clark says it's not necessary. It's not something they need to talk about. Now, I do get what they're going with here, obviously. As I kind of briefly mentioned earlier, Clark's in a bit of denial. They're probably going with the whole thing of, I've never really been ill. I've never been this, that, and the other, so I'm gonna be fine. I did appreciate the little insight that we got here where he said that my body is still getting used to your dad's heart. My mum said there would be an adjustment period. So that opens up speculation to the point of where, okay, he could get to a point of equilibrium. And what I mean by that is, he might not forever be at a point of never not being able to be Superman again, or otherwise every single time his heart could have a heart attack. It might just be the growing pains right now, and later on, as the adjustment period completes and his body, fully accepts it and it's merged a little bit more. Don't get me wrong, it could still be the case where he's not as strong and he can't push himself as hard, but he would still be able to do, for example, what he did earlier with Jonathan without crashing down into the ground. But I do ultimately suspect it's going to serve the overall story as the series comes to a close, and where Clark realizes that he can't really be the world's protector or reliably as much as he used to be, and that's why the boys need to take over. Now later on, when Clark and Lois are talking even more, he reveals even more of the symptoms that he's having. Like, everything feels different. He's okay, not as strong, but he can barely hear out of his left ear, which is that's kind of nuts if you think about it. And it's almost as though he can't trust his own body. I kind of like how they very much so imply that Lois can obviously relate to this, even though it's different situations. She has been in a place with her cancer storyline last season and really bleeding into this season, in where she's had to go through feeling like her body's been failing her, of course. And then they still managed to inject a bit of humor into this scene with him saying, well, this sucks. And it's like he might be feeling the wine for one of the first times in his life. Now, this is where Jordan, his Gretchen Lois arrives. And this is what I mean through just kind of this episode cooking along the other storyline. She arrives and calls her Cheryl Kimball, who, as I looked up online, because I didn't really know who that was, turns out she was the head of LexCorp's space division. And Lois offers her to go on the record, and she'll protect her. Obviously, through going on the record, this could help bring Luthor down. And she's just like, well, I've known Luthor for 30 years. I do feel like this story was all a little bit rushed if I'm bringing my critical brain into this. I don't know. I just feel like we later just jumped to a building that's on fire with her in it, with her saying, he's trying to kill me. I just feel like there's scenes missing of Luthor maybe confronting her, or like, hey, you were meant to stay here, and why is leaving this hidey hole so incredibly important to the point of where he would kill her if he hasn't killed her in 3 decades as a servant to him. I'm not saying that there isn't any nuance being inferred for the audience to pick up on. I'm just saying that I feel like maybe with the limitations of this season and less episodes, it doesn't flesh scenes out as much here. And it would have been cool, like, even if Lex didn't have a huge role in this episode, to have that expanded on a little bit more. Now, we get a bit of a continuation of Jordan's storyline this episode with regards to the phone call and Lois. And I know a lot of people aren't a huge fan of putting Jordan back to this kind of sullen position that he's in, but I do think it was one of the stronger points of this episode. And where he's at with his character and mental space is an organic place. He's been trying to be the hero. He's always been the brother who's kind of been a less popular, more socially anxious brother. And so, when he got these powers, sure, I don't think it was all about the fame for him, but do you know what I mean? As a teenager, he went out there, tried to, be in this world a little bit more, but got taken up in it a little bit when we visited that kind of storyline for him. But then when it came to his dad, he really felt like he could get the heart back. Yes, there's mistakes that got made, but I'm just saying it's a very believable kind of teenage Superboy story to unfold that they've written for Jordan. And now to get to the point of where your mother chose your brother, albeit for a very logical reason, as he says, I kind of wish you chose me. As he then goes on to say, well, everything's just been so easy between you two, but me, I screw everything up. Dad died because of me, Grandpa, and then you choose him. So, it somewhat reinforces, even if it's irrational in your own brain, this sense of worthlessness. And as he says, the final nail in the coffin here is that I'm not mad that you chose John. I'm mad that you were right. So I'm a fan of this storyline. I mean, I I want to kind of be up and over it and get some good stuff with Jordan, but I can't deny that it's an organic story for him. And what I mean by organic is just a natural thing for them to give him in the writing of this season. And I know we got that moment in the wedding when he was speaking to Sarah and she was like, well, what about what you want? And then later on, he gives the Superboy suit to Jonathan, and he says he's taking some time out, so it doesn't mean it's a permanent thing. I think that's fair enough, but I'm sure as we get towards the finale, Jordan will bounce back, and there's going to be a good synergy between both Super Sons here. But this is just maybe a little bit of a timeout for the in-between episodes, but I think we'll have Jordan spring in hopefully sooner rather than later because a situation might demand it. And if anything, it could be quite a redeeming, heroic moment for him that bolsters his confidence once again. Now, a little bit later, Jordan hears a fire in Metropolis and sends Jonathan once again here. So this scene was cool, but I do have some issues with it. I know some people are like, but you're nitpicking. I don't think I am, okay? There's a difference between nitpicking and actual valid criticism. I think it just depends on what your standards are for wiggle room, if you will. So, first of all, to praise it, awesome superhero landing, great seeing Jonathan in the action, cold breath all around the place, X-ray vision reveals someone inside, and, he walks through the fire, which was awesome. This is kind of a big point to what I'm about to say. So he walks through the fire, his hoodie catches alight, I love that, he kind of blows a bit of cold breath on it, and it turns out that it's Cheryl Kimball, confirming what Lois said, that, as she says, he's trying to kill me. And this is when we have one of Lex's goons blast Jonathan. Now, Jordan runs up to Clark after hearing Jonathan in danger, and it's, quite dangerous here in a way for Clark because it turns out he couldn't even hear it, but he does hear it after focusing in after Jordan alerted him about the situation. Now, this is obviously more of a demonstration of Superman's limitations, but this time it is a job for Superman, and he suits up and Superman returns. It's going to be interesting with that end of episode teaser, how the press got wind of that as well. Maybe, I don't know if Luthor would have done that, but who really did that? If he felt like he kept it under wraps. Would love any theories there. But anyway, we cut back to Jonathan getting blasted by the guy's, flamethrower arms again. And Clark comes in the suit with a slightly upgraded symbol, I think. It's not massively different, but I think this is a little upgraded suit. The dude is like, you're supposed to be dead, and he blasts Clark with the flame, and he just walks right through it. And I was half expecting him to be a little bit affected here, especially with everything being teased this episode, but he was fine. So, it was a cool Superman moment, of course. But this is where I'm going to get into a bit of my issue with the scene. Like, I felt like it was completely unnecessary for Superman to arrive to this scene. Not that I didn't find that cool, but logically speaking, I realized that the dude's weapon was just fire. So then I was like, wait, why did that affect Jonathan? There's a few issues here in where I feel like they could have just written the scene to make more sense as well. So he hit the fence from the fire blasting him. So you're telling me that hitting like one of those like cross-hatched little metal railings kind of almost knocks him out, or like at least gets him to a point of gathering himself on the floor, but flying through a whole freaking iceberg doesn't faze him? Do you know what I mean? And you may then be like, okay, Boba, I see what you're saying, but he got hit by the fire. But did we not just see him walk through fire and just being like, oh, my clothes got on fire a little bit. So why does a flamethrower do anything to him? It wouldn't really. So when we're cut back to him as he's flying down the room on the floor and is scrambling back in a bit of like apprehension and fear, but I just wasn't believing this because Jonathan, being as strong as he is, fire not really phasing him other than burning clothes, just doesn't make any logical sense for his character. I don't know. I know sometimes, again, I just say it because I know this winds people up, but again, you're watching a review, so I'm going to pick apart scenes like this if I feel like they could have been done better. And how could it have been done better? I think, really, one of those little freaking green beam laser guns that hit Jordan and Superman in previous episodes would have been a way more believable thing to make Jordan incapacitated in this moment and fear another blast from this guy. So now we know that Jonathan can walk through flames of fire 8 feet tall, but if he gets hit with fire, it for some reason affects him. We know that he can burst through like crazy ass big icebergs and be unharmed, but if he gets launched into a metal fence, he kind of lands face down on the floor. And I know he's half human, half Kryptonian before anyone says it, but still, there's a precedent set for how fire is already okay. I liked that moment between Clark and Jonathan afterwards, though, where he says, well, the important thing is that you saved lives and the rest we can work on later. So overall, like, my review for this episode is such that I enjoyed it, but at the same time, all while I understand not every single episode can be what 1, 2, and 3 was, and it can be a breather episode, even with that in mind, all while I had moments that I enjoyed, you know, of course, the performances I really liked, little gems of Clark returning at the beginning, gems of Jonathan and Clark training, and various other moments in the episode, but at the same time, I think with it not being as impressive of an episode as the first 2 or 3, I think that in conjunction with some of the issues I had kind of just made it a little bit like, you know, I can kind of take or leave this one, to be honest. But the trailer for next week's episode really does seem to be picking back up the pace again.
I'm headed back to Smallville.
For what?
To take care of this.
He is going to do something terrible to my family.
I can't just hide.
Do not give up hope, my son.
Luthor is gonna send his monster. We are not safe here.
So as you saw there, Luthor's going to send back his monster. We're not safe here. Doomsday could be trying to take out Clark. I mean, we see him freaking roaring at the end there. But at the same time, like, Clark doesn't want to hide, yet he might not. Well, I mean, how can he be ready? If he's now got a human heart and he wasn't ready at full Kryptonian potential beforehand, so intrigued as to how Doomsday is going to get defeated. And will it even be in this next episode? Or are they actually going to long it out until like a more like season finale kind of defeating moment? But, you know, we have had ideas of, you know, Steel, maybe the boys, which is obviously risky. Does Clark want to put his kids at risk there? But the boys in conjunction with Superman, half-powered, in conjunction with Natalie and John Henry Irons, maybe. But this is obviously going to be a big tackling point with Lex coming back to Smallville, infuriated that Superman has returned. I can't wait for those scenes. I can't wait also, I think, and I suspect that this next episode will have a scene between Clark Kent and Luthor, somewhat confronting each other before drawing the pistols, if you know what I mean, at some point in the episode. And that could lead to an electric performance or two between them. Now, Lara says, do not give up hope, my son. I wonder if that's with regards to his health, like don't give up hope in how, you know, you are in the adjustment period right now and you will get to a level of equilibrium with the human heart and powers, don't worry. That might not be it, but let's just say, or like entertain that for a second. I don't know if he ever will though. Like, even if there is an adjustment period, he wouldn't be strong enough to defeat Doomsday again. So I think it's going to have to be a tag team situation. But until next week, ladies and gentlemen, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below for episode 4 of Superman and Lois season 4 and any theories on episode 5. Leave a like on this video if you did enjoy it, dislike it. If you disliked it, consider subscribing for more videos just like this. But until next time, I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow Kryptonians in the next video. Goodbye.